my fellow Americans.
I can no longer remain in today's Democratic Party that's under the complete control of an elitist cabal of warmongers who are driven by cowardly wokeness, who divide us by racializing every issue and stoking anti-white racism, who actively work to undermine our God-given freedoms that are enshrined in our Constitution, who are hostile to people of faith and spirituality, who demonize the police but protect criminals at the expense of law-abiding Americans, who believe in open borders, who weaponize the national security state to go after their political opponents, and above all, who are dragging us ever closer to nuclear war. Now, I believe in a government that's of the people, by the people, and for the people. Unfortunately, today's Democratic Party does not. Instead, it stands for a government that is of, by, and for the powerful elite. Now, I'm calling on my fellow common sense, independent-minded Democrats to join me in leaving the Democratic Party. If you can no longer stomach the direction that the so-called woke Democratic Party ideologues are taking our country, then I invite you to join me.
The Vietnam War and the push for US involvement was a result of the Gulf of Tonkin incident. A lie. The Iraq War famously is a result of lies. Wars in Somalia are a result of lies. The Second World War and the German invasion of Poland was a result of carefully constructed lies. That is war by media. Let us ask ourselves, of the complicit media, which is the majority of the mainstream press, what is the average death count attributed to each journalist?
ask you a question. Do you think you should be the one to be able to decide when to pull the trigger?
No, sir.
Isn't that what this is about? If you adopt the position that any time you are denied, your particular, there's 4 groups out there and inspectors, you're the group you headed, anytime you are denied, that ipso facto requires the United States and the Security Council to act on what they said they would do, which is to use whatever means necessary to take on Saddam Hussein so you can get into that particular facility. Is that not correct? Is that not your position?
Mr. Senator, I have a job to do, or I had a job to do, and that was to disarm Iraq in accordance with the provisions
No,
of
I got
relevant
that.
resolutions.
With all due respect, I'm not trying to be confrontational. I'm trying to get this as clear as I can. I really mean this now. You have an absolute logic. You put together a very tight syllogism here. You've indicated that your job is to disarm. The only way you can disarm is to have access. The only way you can have access is either with permission on the part of Iraq, or if denied, forced access, right?
Compelled access.
Compel. Well, okay, compel. You sound like the lawyer and I sound like the military guy. I mean, compelled, where I come from, when my old man said you're compelled, it meant I was forced. I mean, it was a real simple proposition. It wasn't much to debate. Now, there is a clear logic to that. And that's what I mean when I say I respect your position. But that means that whenever you choose a target that warrants inspection and you are denied, that ipso facto, at that moment, the only way your position can be satisfied or sustained is if the UN Security Council or the United States, acting unilaterally, uses force to guarantee access. Is not that true?
Yes, sir.
Now, that means that you get to choose the time and place when we would use force, if we use force.
No, sir.
Of course you do. If you choose the site and it's denied.
And we coordinate with the member states to include the United States.
Exactly.
And prior to us going in, we have their agreement that this indeed is an inspection worth doing.
Okay, inspection worth doing, everybody's agreed it's worth doing, and it gets stopped.
Yes, sir.
At that moment, we're an automatic pilot as far as you're concerned. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now, I respect that. But now, it seems to me the Secretary of State might have a slightly different problem. Secretary of State might be sitting there and saying, now look over there on that side. Now, I remember so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and the 12 people on this side, they're all the ones that said they didn't want to use force. Now, I'm going to have to go tell the President now that we should, or Secretary Cohen, unleash whatever it takes to get it done. And our military assessment is the same as the Major's. The Major's assessment is, privately held but publicly acknowledged later, that airstrikes alone aren't going to do this. Saddam's not going to cave on this. So, now here's the deal. I recommended the President have at it and let the chips fall where they may. A reasonable position for the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State to take. But I respectfully suggest, Major, I respectfully suggest they have a responsibility slightly above your pay grade. Slightly above your pay grade. To decide whether or not to take the nation to war alone. Or to take the nation to war partway. Or to take the nation to war halfway. That's a real tough decision. That's why they get paid the big bucks. That's why they get the limos and you don't. I mean this sincerely. I'm not trying to be flip. Because I think, and that's why I said at the outset, the reason why I'm glad you did what you did, we should come to our milk. We should make a decision. But in terms of whether the Secretary of State has no more to consider than you do as the arms inspector, you didn't get in, didn't get my job done, get me in. Period. You made the deal, right? That's the deal. A deal's a deal. Get me in. Scott Ritter, I'm ready to go. It's not how it works. Now, maybe it should work that way. But wouldn't you acknowledge that if you were President of the United States or the Secretary of State, you'd sit there and say, now, okay, old Scotty boy didn't get in. We said he should get in. We want him to get in. It's important that he does get in. They're not going to let him in, so what are we going to do now? We know that France and Russia aren't going to be with us. We're quite confident China's not. We've already run those traps. They're not there. We're not sure where the United States Senate is, but have at it, boys. Go get them. And by the way, Scott and the boys say air power's not enough. I think it's a legitimate debate, Scott, Major. I think it's a legitimate debate. But I don't think we should be putting it in the context of you have somebody up there at state saying, look, how can we weasel out of this agreement? We want to let this guy out there hanging. We're not this. It's a very practical political decision. Same kind of decision General Powell made. Same kind of decision President Bush made. Every president, every Secretary of State has to do it. Like I said, they get paid more than you. Their job's a hell of a lot more complicated than yours. They may have made the wrong decision, and you brought it to light. We should address it. We should say straight up where we are, and we should do it. And for that, I thank you. But it's above your pay grade.
Rationality belongs to the cool observers, but because of the stupidity of the average man, he follows not reason but faith, and the naive faith of the proletarian requires necessary illusion and emotionally potent oversimplifications, which have to be provided by myth makers to keep the ordinary person on the right course.
That I'm allowed to ask you this question is because today the federal court ruled that the government doesn't have the right to determine who is or is not a journalist. This is the second election in a row that the court had to overturn your government. Do you still insist on being able to make that decision, and why?
First of all, questions around accreditation were handled by the press gallery and the consortium of networks who have strong perspectives on quality journalism and the important information that is shared with Canadians. The reality is organizations like yours that continue to spread misinformation and disinformation on the science around vaccines, around how we're going to actually get through this pandemic and be there for each other and keep our kids safe, is part of why we're seeing such unfortunate anger and lack of understanding of basic science. And quite frankly, I won't call it a media organization, your group of individuals need to take accountability for some of the polarization that we're seeing in this country. And I think Canadians are cluing into the fact that there is a really important decision we take about the kind of country we want to see. And I salute all extraordinary, hardworking journalists that put science and facts at the heart of what they do and ask me tough questions every day, but make sure that they are educating and informing Canadians from a broad range of perspectives, which is the last thing that you guys do.
Killed a million people in Iraq.
That is a separate...
You killed 1 million people in Iraq. It's incredible that you have the brass neck to be sitting here now urging another Iraq war.
George,
after
if
what
I was
you've
still
already
in
done.
Parliament...
There can be no doubt that Saddam Hussein has biological weapons and the capability to rapidly produce more, many more. And he has the ability to dispense these lethal poisons and diseases in ways that can cause massive death and destruction. If biological weapons seem too terrible to contemplate, chemical weapons are equally chilling. UNMOVIC already laid out much of this, and it is documented for all of us to read in UNSCOM's 1999 report on the subject. If we consider just one category of missing weaponry, 6,500 bombs from the Iran-Iraq war, UNMOVIC says the amount of chemical agent in them would be in the order of 1,000 tons. These quantities of chemical weapons are now unaccounted for. Dr. Blick says, quipped that, quote, mustard gas is not marmalade. You are supposed to know what you did with it. We believe Saddam Hussein knows what he did with it, and he has not come clean with the international community. We have evidence these weapons existed. What we don't have is evidence from Iraq that they have been destroyed or where they are. That is what we are still waiting for.
Dr. Fauci, knowing that it is a crime to lie to Congress, do you wish to retract your statement of May 11th where you claimed that the NIH never funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, I have never lied before the Congress, and I do not retract that statement. This paper that you are referring to was judged by qualified staff up and down the chain as not being gain of function. Let me finish.
You take an animal virus and you increase its transmissibility to humans. Right. You're saying that's not gain of function?
Yeah, that is correct. And Senator Paul, you do not know what you are talking about, quite frankly. And I want to say that officially. You do not know what you are talking about. Okay, you get one person.
Let's read from the NIH definition of gain of function. This is your definition that you guys wrote. It says that scientific research that increases the transmissibility among mammals is gain of function. They took animal viruses that only occur in animals and they increased their transmissibility to humans. How you can say that is not gain of function?
It is not.
It's a dance, and you're dancing around this because you're trying to obscure responsibility for 4 million people dying around the world from a pandemic.
And let's Dr. Fauci.
I have to, well, now you're getting into something. If the point that you are making is that the grant that was funded as a sub-award from EcoHealth to Wuhan created SARS-CoV-2. That's where you are getting. Let me finish.
We don't know.
Well, wait a minute.
It did come from the lab, but all the evidence is pointing that it came from the lab, and there will be responsibility for those who funded the lab, including yourself.
I totally
This committee will allow the witness to respond.
I totally resent the lie that you are now propagating, Senator, because if you look at the viruses that were used in the experiments, that were given in the annual reports, that were published in the literature, it is molecularly impossible.
No one's saying those viruses caused it.
It
no
is
one is
molecularly.
Those viruses caused the pandemic. What we're alleging is that gain-of-function research was going on in that lab, and NIH funded it.
That is
you can't
not.
Get away from it. It meets your definition, and you are obfuscating the truth.
I'm not obfuscating the truth.
Senator
You are the
Paul's
one.
time is expired, but I will allow the witness to.
Let me just finish. I want everyone to understand that if you look at those viruses, and that's judged by qualified virologists and evolutionary biologists, those viruses are molecularly impossible
No one's
to
saying
result
they are. No
in
one's saying those viruses
SARS-CoV-2.
caused the pandemic.
Senator Paul,
We're saying they are gain-of-function viruses because they were
They're not.
animal viruses that became more transmissible in human, and you funded it.
And
won't
you
admit the truth.
and you
Senator
implying
Paul, your time has expired, and I will allow witnesses who come before this committee to respond. Dr.
and you are implying that what we did was responsible for the deaths of individual. I totally resent
could
that.
have been.
And if
And it
anybody
could
is
have been.
lying here, Senator, it is you.
Whatever our hopes may be for the future, for reducing this threat or living with it, there is no escaping either the gravity or the totality of its challenge to our survival and to our security. A challenge that confronts us in unaccustomed ways in every sphere of human activity. This deadly challenge imposes upon our society two requirements of direct concern, both to the press and to the President. Two requirements that may seem almost contradictory in tone, but which must be reconciled and fulfilled if we are to meet this national peril. I refer first to the need for far greater public information, and second, to the need for far greater official secrecy. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Welcome in, everyone, to Redacted on this Wednesday.
Welcome in. What are you doing over there?
What am I doing? I'm sorry, I was pushing your glasses out of the way.
Laughing.
Well, I don't know, because I was laughing because I pushed your glasses out of the way and then you pushed them back in. I'm Clayton Morris.
I'm Natali.
So good to have you here back in the show, back in the studio. We are live. Good to see all of you. 4 p.m. Eastern time. We are live Monday through Thursday, usually, but we took a few days off this week. Carnival and whatever else it is. Mardi
Kids
Gras,
were out.
kids out of school, and so a lot of people off school right now. And so we thought we'd take a few days just to relax a little bit and spend some downtime with the family. And we were traveling a little bit. We do have a very busy show for you on this Wednesday. But first, we want to say thank you to all of the viewers who we got to see while we were traveling. We were in parts of France and Switzerland, and so very kind of you, all the Redacted viewers that they came up to us and said hello, and then those who maybe didn't. Nice to see all of you, and thank you so much for your kind words.
Yeah, I get a kick out of it when someone watches our show and says something to me. So thank you if you see us in the wild. I really love to see that there are real faces on the other side of this camera. I am tickled pink by it.
Yes, so thanks to all of you. All right, we've got a busy show for you on this Wednesday, and there's a lot to get to in Ohio and the broader context of how much of a disaster this actually is. We're hearing now from a number of scientists and health experts saying, look, the administration, there is a cover-up here, and what the damage is actually, the potential for this damage to be multi-generational in East Palestine, Ohio. And then, of course, we've got a fire breaking out at a uranium processing plant in Tennessee this afternoon, and we have a metal plant that was on fire in Ohio, which unfortunately took the lives of a number of people. What is happening at all of these factories across the United States? So we're going to look at that a little bit later.
Plus, we promised you coverage of the anti-war rally that happened on the 19th of February, just a few days ago. We have it. We're going to explain to you. I mean, we were right in our prediction that mainstream media would not want much to do with it. They are more interested in attacking it than actually taking on the content of peace protests. Yeah. So we're going to bring you that coverage.
But we should say it was a huge success. So, I think the anti-war rally, the anti-war movement in the United States is back, and perhaps even around the world. But this was a big, big rally, and we were thrilled to be a part of it. We were thrilled that many Redacted viewers came into the anti-war rally in D.C. So hello to all of you who made it to D.C. and supported this rally. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We heard from a lot of you who showed up in Washington, so that is fantastic. And we're also going to look at some new EU data on vaccines. This new periodic review of adverse effects for vaccines is out. Investigative journalist Sonia Elijah has done a deep dive in this data, and she's going to be joining us a little bit later in the show to go over these stunning pieces of data that have been covered up, not surprisingly, by these governments. So all of that and more as Redacted starts right now. See all of you, and Kurt in the chat today, and Andy Sav in the chat. Kurt says Vanguard and BlackRock own the train company, and Andy says BlackRock owns everything that makes everything. Can you imagine owning everything that makes everything? Everything that we know about is owned by these two companies. In one way or the other.
I can. And you know what? I hate to be dystopian about it, but this weekend my kids were both reading Hunger Games 2 and 3. And I was like, it feels like that's where we're headed. This idea of like one corporation that controls everything, that will show us who's in charge by this display of violence through a Hunger Games type thing. And then I also was reading Edward Snowden's biography, and I am full-blown paranoid now. I'm telling you where I'm coming from.
Tonight's show is not going to help you at all. I mean, it's
I have a question.
Yeah.
How is it possible? Like, is there no monopoly in that situation because you own such a swath of things that it's not really monopolizing? It's just you own everything?
Because they own all of these disparate pieces, and that's the brilliance of these companies is they own like majority stakes and or not even majority, but even minority, and so many of these companies that they get to sway boardroom decisions, and so everything you can think of is owned by these two companies. Everything.
Well, not only that, but even if they do have a monopoly on something, in order for it to be a monopoly, somebody has to like pursue it and actually like enforce it. And so if nobody has the will to do so, then it doesn't matter if you have a monopoly. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Robert Knight, thank you for your super chat, says, please report this, the new executive order establishing equity action teams in every administration agency of the government. They're building a party system inside the government in the next 30 days, signed on the 16th of February. Yes, huge story. So thank you for your super chat on that. We do have a daily newsletter, which will be back tomorrow. In effect, we took a few days off, but it's back by popular demand. We usually publish it Monday through Friday. Redacted.inc is the place to go. You just go to that website and you put in your email address. You'll receive a welcome email, but you have to verify your email. And then tomorrow morning at around 6:30, 7 a.m. Eastern time, you'll get a brand new newsletter. And you can read it in about 5 or 10 minutes over your cup of coffee, and it's a lot of fun. And we cover some of the big stories of the day that the mainstream media largely ignores. We also try to make you laugh a little bit, get you caught up to speed, and then you can go out the door and start your day. We think it's, we try to bring you a lot of value. So it's totally free, redacted.inc, not .com, .inc. In fact, we had one of our extended team members, he said, hey, the website's not working. And then we figured out what he did. He typed in redacted.com. We're like, no, it's not. We don't own that. That's not our website. It's redacted.inc, and everything is working just fine. All right, let's get into the top story now. If you needed any more examples of where America's priorities are, all you need to do is look at President Biden traveling to Ukraine. What a slap in the face. I mean, to kiss the ring of Vladimir Zelensky while the people of East Palestine, Ohio are dealing with potentially one of the worst chemical disasters in American history. And this is not hyperbole at this point, guys. Because now we have the data. And we have a history here of context that we're going to place for you here. Over the past few days, experts have been detailing how the chemical fallout is worse than Chernobyl. That's because of the multi-generational fallout from this train derailment. From the beginning, when we started to get details about this, we had experts on this show talking about that, specifically laying out how this could be multi-generational because of the amount of cleanup involved in these chemicals. And it could be worse than Chernobyl because of how many decades it could take to clean this up. What happens to that town in the meantime then? What happens to those people's homes in the meantime? You have at least 5 chemicals that we know of, right? That we at least know of, and we think we know of because they told us they were here, that burned off, and perhaps more that we don't even know were there. Or chemical compounds that were created after the flames, after they were incinerated. And how many chemicals were actually in the trains before these new chemicals were placed in the trains? So a lot of questions that we don't have answers to, and it doesn't seem like we're going to be getting any of them anytime soon. Journalists and health experts now are rightly pointing out that the burning of these toxic chemicals created what are known as chlorinated dioxins. And boy, have I gone over the past few days down a rabbit hole of dioxins in more ways than one. Dioxin is a byproduct of any manufacturing process that involves chlorine. And we know that dioxins were, in fact, in these trains, according to reports, beforehand. They were already there before they were set on fire. We also know that dioxins in this quantity can literally render soil and drinking water for miles, miles and miles and miles away, permanently contaminated. Again, Chernobyl level disaster here. And we know now that the EPA also was told of the incident about 2 hours after it happened. So the Biden administration knew right from the start that this was happening. They can't even pretend they weren't actively involved in this decision to burn these chemicals. And the pictures, of course, of these, of what we've saw from these clouds is just unbelievable.
Now, if we refer, though, to the press release that Norfolk Southern, the train company, was putting out at the time saying we are working with the EPA to do what they call a controlled burn or controlled exposure. I don't remember the terms. They had been saying, so I think this is going to be important when litigation hits. It already has, is if they can prove that they were working with the government, that they gave their sort of scientific models to the government, said, we have to burn this or else. And so the EPA then put out this statement a few days later saying, oh, this is bad. We're going to hold you liable. You know, this is worse than we thought it was. Well, but if the EPA knew all along, then it's a CYA type of situation. Then who are these people going to be able to hold liable?
Yeah.
Norfolk Southern, if they were working with the government, if they had permission, if they were working with the EPA. Now the EPA turning around saying, oh, this is worse than our models. We're going to hold you liable. We don't like this. Then the question here that lingers is who is liable, who passed the buck, and who can people actually get money and answers from? Right,
because if both governors were consulted on this, both Pennsylvania and Ohio governors were consulted on this and actually issued, get out of town orders. So they knew about this. They knew what was coming. Yeah. So they can't just sit back and say, we didn't know, we weren't really consulted on this. And of course, Governor Mike DeWine stepping in and basically saying, absolutely, like he's the authority in authorizing the burning. But the EPA knew within 2 hours. So the Biden administration knew about this right from the get-go. Very little time had elapsed before the EPA was notified under the Biden administration. What's stunning, though, we know that when they were told about this 2 hours afterwards, so the Biden administration knew from the start what was happening. They can't pretend that they weren't involved. They can't pretend that they were, as we heard from Pete Buttigieg, we're just deferring to local state authorities to handle this. Right?
Again, what turns my stomach about this, though, is that they can show it in a court of law. And so when you go to sue them, they can say, we got permission from the government. Our models showed that it would blow everybody else up if we didn't burn it ourselves. The government gave us permission. So all of these things are things that could potentially be exculpatory when it comes to liability if they can prove it.
Yeah.
And so this is another thing that will leave these people high and dry if there's nobody there if they can just keep passing the buck of responsibility.
Well, and of course they're in collusion with them anyway, right? How much money are these companies actually giving to these these candidates anyway over the years? So, Vanguard, BlackRock, all of these guys that own these companies are just funneling money to these candidates in the first place. So they're all in cahoots from the very beginning. What's stunning, though, is that we can't find any evidence. Still to this day, this afternoon, we can't find any evidence that anyone has been testing for dioxin contamination. There is zero evidence that anyone has done tests for dioxins at this point, which is unbelievable. There are, in fact, no, and I mean no, safe levels of exposure for dioxins. None. And as these chemical experts point out, that dioxin is a multi-generational genetic and hormonal toxin. Investigative reporter Eric Capolino has been covering government cover-ups for years. His work is fantastic. He's been looking at chemical spills, chemical dumps, since the early 1980s. He was 19 years old back in 1983 when he first covered and exposed the town of Love Canal in New York. It had to be resettled, of course, because it was built on toxic chemicals, and the government hid it there in the 1950s and 1960s. And so, it started leaching out, and we had to close this whole town down because of all of the devastating carcinogenic effects of these chemicals that were leaching out. Eric reports that real testing involves sending samples from the same location to 2 different independent labs that are under different contracts, he writes, so that Norfolk Southern couldn't corrupt the data. We're just going to send it to our lab at Norfolk Southern. We're going to take care of it. This is called split sampling, and any other testing is subject to manipulation, basically. So we're going to trust the train company to do this testing? Sure. Would you? So these split samples aren't happening. Isn't that amazing? This could be one of the largest ecological chemical disasters in American history. They're not doing it. Why? Do you trust the Norfolk Southern is handling all of this? I don't. Eric also points out that this is how everyone should be dressed in East Palestine, Ohio right now. Take a look at your screen. If you're driving and listening, they're wearing hazmat suits, full hazmat suits, trying to clean down certain areas near the train tracks, near the train. This is how he says everyone should be dressed. And by the way, he's not the only one. A number of other health experts saying the same thing, confirming that. These workers know how toxic this city is now. That's why they're dressed this way. They know because they have a history of these burns and chemicals destroying whole towns, and then are covered up by companies and governments. Eric explains this in his work. He says this is how these chemicals work. While dioxin can be an acute poison, particularly to babies, fetuses, young children, and animals, it's rarely so in adults, so it doesn't really present itself as a poison. Rather, it's a hormonal toxin. In at least three-generation multi-generational toxin, and a cancer inducer and cancer promoter. All of these are related, he writes. So many generations will experience this cancer-creating toxin. No wonder President Biden went to Ukraine instead of Ohio. He knows how dangerous it is. There's frankly no way to keep you free of this chemical if you're there. That's the point.
Well, and I don't know if you saw the local coverage, but there were people that their homes were completely closed up, no air, no windows open or anything. And they had like this stuff caked on all the stuff in their house. And they were talking about when they moved it, it raised those particles and people were having to go to the hospital from breathing that in. I don't know if it's that chemical. I don't know if it's the same thing. But then also the company is going door to door and telling people they will help them clean that up. And they have to sign this paper. And in that paper, they are agreeing to not hold the Norfolk liable for the damages.
Yeah. And this is the thing. We're saying, like, don't sign these papers. And that's what they've done. And that's what these companies do. They'll go into these towns and they'll offer you like $100,000 to shut up. $100,000, right? And you can't say anything. It'll be an NDA. It'll be a non-disclosure agreement. You'll sign it and you're sort of basically signing your life away. And for a lot of these people, and we're going to get into some of the home values here in a second. For a lot of these people, this is, of course, life-changing money, right? Yeah. But what happens if your life is now cut short because of this? As people are reporting in the chat, and we've heard this from other reports, people are coughing up blood in this area.
Oh my God.
And of course, it's just been a disaster. People, as like David was saying, like, people going in and finding like their mouths are tingling but it's what you don't see. That's the point, right? You can, some of the immediate effects, you can the smell and taste and so forth. It's the long-term hormonal cancer-causing effects that you just don't see.
And I mean, we're going to see pretty soon when the spring planting season is coming, what that town looks like, what natural organic substances are going to grow and what are not.
And there's state parks nearby. Like if you look at the map into Pennsylvania on that side, of course, there are state game lands there as well. So people who are going and hunting and doing bison hunting, venison hunting, deer hunting season for many families that rely on this, get one, they end up getting one animal for the season. And then that's what they can sustain an entire family. Well, what if that one animal is now a contaminated animal as a result? In that same area.
Most likely.
Yeah, go ahead, David.
Well, and I was going to point out the Chernobyl. I know you guys didn't watch that show yet, but there are people that after that explosion, they were very far away, and they're standing on this bridge, and these ashes are falling, and they're just like, whoa, this is so beautiful. Like, it's like snow coming down. And years later, all those people had cancer. So it's like, this could be years down the line that people don't realize this stuff they're breathing in is long term, and they might not have any of the short term effects, but like long term, it could be all kinds of things.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, because particulates, and we don't even know, what gets caused, again, in the water, in the groundwater, and in the soil specifically. So no wonder President Biden went to Ukraine instead of Ohio, because there's no way to keep the guy safe. And literally less, you can't have a president walking around wearing one of these hazmat suits. I mean, can you imagine President Biden walking around in one of these things?
Yes, I absolutely can imagine it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
but that's what you would literally have to do to make sure that he's 100% safe.
And it would, I mean, when he's not in a suit, he's a bit, like, it might be better for his optics. Yeah, but
they could be literally like, hey, that's Biden in there. That's Biden in that hazmat suit. He can say and do
fewer creepy things if we wrap him up like that. So this is a perfect press opportunity.
Just sound air raid silence.
Go ahead, Philip.
Yeah, but it would send the wrong impression, though, wouldn't it? If he showed up
exactly.
in that, it would
it's
send
about
the impression
optics.
That somebody screwed up. Exactly.
So
you can't have that. That would
they're
be
in quite a pickle here. And we're going to get into Buttigieg in a minute, because the reason, the transportation secretary hasn't gone yet, I mean, and now we know he's going tomorrow, but why wait so long, right? You know what the problem is. You're being told not to go. So it turns out that this isn't the first time the government has destroyed a town in the Midwest. And by the way, I should point out, you know, I have a bunch of reports this afternoon from people in the UK, and were sending messages to us telling us that because of the cloud, the wafting of this cloud, that, you know, it's now traveled east. Of course, it went through like Washington, D.C. People are saying based on the jet stream and so where it would have gone, people in the UK are reporting weird film on their cars. Like after rain, there's like a weird film on windows and cars that they've never seen before.
Are they on that latitude?
I don't know. And again, I'm just reporting what they're telling.
Interesting.
Unless anyone wants to test it.
I mean, not that clouds follow latitude lines, I know.
Right, and whatever gets up into that jet stream. But anyway,
Right.
I would love to know if someone in the UK wants to actually test their windows or whatever residue is on there, you know, and let us know. But anyway, so it went airborne. It wafted hundreds of miles away. People described awful taste in their mouths, tingling lips, hundreds of miles away from this. Eventually, it'll drift away and dissipate. But of course, the chemicals in the ground and the groundwater will last decades. That's the real story here. It could render the town totally unlivable. Turns out that this isn't the first time that the government destroyed a town in the Midwest. An entire town contaminated by dioxins in the soil and the drinking water. People dying early thanks to inexplicable cancers. Sound familiar? I have an idea where they came from, though, that maybe it could have been that plant down the street that was making Agent Orange. How about that? The government then decided to spray the whole town in Agent Orange. Yeah, we're just going to spray the whole town in Agent Orange, see how that goes.
Okay.
Smart move, government. The town of Times Beach, Missouri was the town. Just one of them. By the way, there was more. This is just one example I wanted to highlight here. The dioxins in the soil would years later have to be dug up and incinerated. And likely the same thing is going to have to happen in East Palestine, Ohio. Ohio rendering the town, they're basically rendering this town useless in Ohio. So Truth Steam Media produced a great documentary on the Times Beach dioxin disaster. Here's a clip, watch.
When I was a little girl, I remember driving on I-44 with my mom past the desolate remains of what used to be Times Beach. The street sat empty save for the dark, windowless husks of decaying abandoned houses. And she would always tell me the story about how that was where everyone had to be evacuated because of toxic waste contamination, even though I was barely old enough to understand what that meant at first. Every time we'd drive by on our way out into St. Louis County to visit family, I'd get that tingly feeling in the pit of my stomach, knowing we were going to pass by it. By 1985, Times Beach was disincorporated, evacuated, and quarantined, save for one elderly couple who refused to leave. The town wasn't demolished until 1992. More than 265,000 tons of tainted soils were incinerated at the site beginning in 1996, and by 1999 all was declared well, and the state opened up a Route 66 themed park where the town once stood.
So it's amazing. And they don't even really, in this Route 66 museum, they don't even hardly comment about it at all. They're like, here's Route 66. There used to be a town here. It's not here anymore. It's totally gone. So what will happen now? Perhaps
Go
ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna say that's like the theme park equivalent of building your housing development on a cemetery, right? We all saw how that happened in Poltergeist. Like, what? Like who would decide that? I would just leave it alone.
Yeah,
that's insane.
Well, and that's exactly what happened at Love Canal in New York. It's like, okay, here's an idea. We'll take what's left over from the Manhattan Project and we'll bury it right here. And then we'll build a town on top of it and see how that turns out. Didn't turn out very well for the people that lived there. So, you know, the question is now, like, what happens now in East Palestine, Ohio? And perhaps more of what we're already seeing, which is cover up, denial, everything's fine, lies, distractions with other stories. I mean, President Biden flew to Ukraine instead of flying to Ohio. Like, shows you where his priorities are, right?
The Associated Press, you know, sort of congratulated them like, oh, you really pulled this off. We didn't know you were coming. They snuck him out at 3:30 in the morning out of the White House. It was a surprise to all of us. And then, that was amazing. Thanks for that surprise for us.
Yeah, it's so amazing. 500, another round of millions of dollars, like $500 million in addition to the $140 billion that we've already sent to Ukraine, because we have to make sure that Ukraine's railroads are state of the art and running on time. We have to make sure that all of that work that Hunter Biden did in Ukraine isn't for nothing.
But he can, Ukraine, such a war zone, he can walk around there freely.
He's fine walking around there.
Totally fine. Ohio, he cannot go.
Thank you, Putin.
Right.
Yeah, thanks Putin for just like holding off on the, just hold off while the president's there, and then, we'll sound the air raid sirens. Nothing's coming in. They haven't gone off once, but we'll sound them off now. But thank you, Putin, for holding back.
Yeah, no trouble. Yeah, Putin's such a threat that President Biden and his whole entourage can fly in there. No trouble at all there. So Biden won't go to Ohio. Well, what about Pete Buttigieg, the transportation secretary, the man who's responsible for our rail infrastructure? When will he go? A reporter from the Daily Caller caught up with Mayor Pete last night to ask him that question while he was out for a stroll on the town with his husband. Watch.
Secretary, what do you have to say? Hi, how are you? Good. Jenny Terra with the Daily Caller News Foundation. What do you have to say to the folks in Ohio, East Palestine, who are suffering right now?
Well, I'd refer you to about a dozen interviews I've given today, and if you'd like to arrange a conversation, be sure to reach out to our press office, but I'm not going to have that conversation with you. Just walk
You
down
don't
the
have a
street
message
here.
for them?
I do, and I shared it with the press many times today. I'd refer you to those comments.
Would you mind sharing it with us?
No, I'm going to refer you to the comments that I made to the press because right now I'm taking some personal time and I'm walking down the street.
Are you going down there?
What's that?
Are you going down there at all?
Yeah, I am.
When are you going?
I'll share that when I'm ready.
Okay,
I'll talk down the
thank
street. Can I get a photo of you?
Yeah.
Can I take a photo of you? So then he snaps a photo of her, the reporter. Like he's that threatened. I need to take a photo of you.
He's got to put the facial recognition in his system at home.
Right.
Yeah, I got to find out who this person was. This vicious Daily Caller reporter asking tough
you want to do it
questions.
selfie style? Let's do it that way.
Right. That's what I would have done.
We should keep an eye on her, actually.
That's what I was
Who that
thinking.
reporter was, yeah.
That was a little President Snow. I'm telling you, everything feels like the Hunger Games. I need to give it a rest.
You do. You need to take a break from that. So Mayor Pete said multiple times, I refer you to the TV interviews I did today for your answers. And he said it kind of smugly, like up to the 12 or so interviews I did today. Like, your life is so tough that you sat in a chair and did television interviews. Like, your life is so tough compared to what people are going through in East Palestine, Ohio right now. He appeared on a bunch of state-run media channels like ABC, CBS News. Here's ABC giving us consoling words from Mayor Pete, who says, hey, look, don't worry about this disaster. I was a mayor of my hometown for 8 years. We dealt with a lot of big disasters. Watch.
The administration has come under some fire for its response. The mayor of East Palestine has said it took nearly 2 weeks for the White House to contact him. There were shouts of "Where's Pete Buttigieg?" at a town hall meeting last week. What's your response to that? When are you going to go to East Palestine?
Well, I am planning to go, and our folks were on the ground from the first hours. I do want to stress that the NTSB needs to be able to do its work independently. But when I go, the focus is going to be on action. Look, I was mayor of my hometown for 8 years. We dealt with a lot of disasters, natural and human.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I want to stay out of the way of the NTSB, as if a transportation secretary is going to literally shut down the whole town. If a transportation secretary shuts down the infrastructure, then we have a problem, right? Like, that he going there is a problem for the National Transportation Safety Board. Really? He's going there. And then, oh, by the way, I was mayor of my own hometown, and we had disasters. Yeah. You had some stoplights that were broken. Nothing like this.
He acts like it's gonna, like he needs a photer's guide to go and read up on this type of vacation. Like, oh, let me see where there is to eat there.
Yeah, I want to check the hotel situation first and the Yelp reviews. Go ahead, Phil.
I grew up about about 25, 30-minute drive from South Bend, Indiana, and my mom still lives about 30-minute drive from there. And no, they didn't. Nothing even close to this caliber of disaster happened in South Bend. Not even close.
Okay, we call BS on that one.
Heavy wind and snow, and that's it.
Yeah, he had some salt trucks that were delayed from getting the salt out during a snowstorm. So that's the disaster. We've had a lot of disasters. I can deal with this one. So when are you going to go? Well, it turns out we do know now that he's going to go tomorrow. He did announce just about 4 hours ago. We found out that he is going to go tomorrow after some hemming and hawing, but not before a lot of pressure from media and local media in particular that was pushing him on this. But here's CBS pushing him on this. When are you going to go, actually? Because this is like now how many weeks? February 3rd? I mean, what are you waiting for? In 19 days now? How long until you go? Didn't we learn anything from George W. Bush flying over Hurricane Katrina and looking out the window after being at a fundraiser with Arnold Schwarzenegger playing guitar on stage? Like, point. You go, right? If you're saying everything's fine, then show us without a hazmat suit on. Everything's fine. People don't have to worry. Go. Why don't you go and dig up some soil while you're there too? Here he is on CBS. Watch.
And you have said that you would visit East Palestine when the time is right, but it's been 2 weeks since this derailment. When is the time right?
So I'm planning to go, and when I do, it will be focused on action, not on politics, not on show. In the early days, I have been respecting the role that the independent NTSB plays and staying out of their way, but we are now entering the policy phase of our response to this. And even as NTSB continues finalizing their work, this is the right time for us to be looking at immediate steps from USDOT.
But, sir, you ran for president. You understand politics better than most, and you know the importance of showing up. So why not go sooner to show people on the ground the efforts being made by the administration?
Well, again, the administration was on the ground from day one. I have followed the normal practice of transportation secretaries in the early days after a crash, allowing NTSB to lead the safety work and staying out of their way. But I am very eager to have conversations with people in East Palestine about how this has impacted them. And again, when I'm there, the focus is going to be on results. It's going to be on work that needs to be done, because one thing I saw as a mayor dealing with multiple disasters is that there's two kinds of people who show up in the aftermath of a disaster. People who are there because they have a specific role to play, and they're there to play their role and do the work and help the community. And people who are there because they want to be seen being there and they want to look good. When I'm there, it's going to be about action.
Okay, good. No more political stunts.
Action.
He didn't ask her to send him a selfie after they were done.
Yeah, I need to take a picture of you for asking me that question. So then, but it was actually local news that was pushing the transportation secretary even harder than mainstream media. So here's a local station pushing him on this question. Watch.
So I'll follow that up with asking, will you be heading there?
I am planning to come. I've been careful to respect the independent role of the NTSB and stay out of their way. But we're now entering the phase where it's about policy. It's about what my department does.
So I love the continued reading off of a cue card. I'm going to go there. I'm planning to go, but I want to respect the individual, the autonomy of the NTSB. I want to stay out of their way. I want to keep staying out of their way. When I go, it's going to be about action. Like just repeating that same talking point on every news or every news station. Thing. Yeah, what does that even mean? Perhaps the clearest indication, though, of cities' health is its real estate market, right? And do people want to move there or move away from a city as a result of it? In the case of Missouri, where dioxin poison destroyed the town of Times Beach, you won't find anything there because the town has been destroyed. It doesn't exist anymore. Trying to do a search on Zillow for Times Beach, Missouri, you'll find nothing. You won't find anything. But what about East Palestine? So I decided to take a look. So take a look at what Zillow prices are this afternoon in East Palestine, Ohio. Let's zoom in here on East Palestine. You can see a number of houses for sale and price drops. Number of price drops now. Now, this one's a little bit outside of the city. Here's a 4-bedroom, 4-bath. You can see that's been on the market now for 7 days. They're trying to sell their house. They're like, oh, crap, we better get out of here. Here's others now. Here's a new construction, $499,000. Well, I wonder, here's one, a price drop. They just cut the price $25,000 on February 21st. I'm sorry, but on all these other houses that have been sitting on the market for 100 days or longer in this town. And by the way, 3-bedroom, 2-bath for $70,000.
I know.
I mean,
I was going to say that'd be almost $1 million out here.
Well, it's a steal, right? For like an investment property or something like that. But here, look, price cut $10,000. 61 days. I'm telling you, these homes are not going to sell now, unfortunately. And some of these homes that have been sitting on the market for 75 days, like, we are in a housing crisis in the United States. We need 5 million homes. And the fact that these have been sitting here and are going to be sitting here probably forever, unfortunately, for these people.
Unless BlackRock is interested in some
rental properties. Because there will be a town, people still, I don't know. Ugh, it's really awful. Go ahead, Phil.
And that's the thing. Like, if you have to understand, it's like these people that live there now are stuck there.
Yeah.
Because who's gonna buy their property? Who's gonna move? Who's gonna want to move there? So they are literally stuck there unless they just happen to have enough cash lying around to buy another house. Which who does?
Right.
You know, they're trapped.
Yeah, and these houses, like, that's a great, and that'd be a great investment property for someone. If someone's saying, I want to, or to move there, I want to buy that for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath for $70,000 in a 7 out of 10 school district, like, not bad. But now the school was like ground zero for where these chemicals were.
Right.
And the land, who's going to buy this? Who's going to move there? Who's going to sell it?
And probably a lot of these people saw their balance sheets go up during the pandemic when home values were surging. And now they're seeing that just sort of swept out from under them. So where they thought they may have had wealth inside their own primary home, they no longer do.
And a $25,000 price drop on a home that's that cheap already?
Right.
Like, that is huge. And this is, I mean, just devastating for these people. Go ahead, David.
I was going to say, there's another incident that I can't mention the incident because it'll start a hellfire, but there was an area where when the government was going in and trying to, get people to stop talking about things, they paid off houses. They paid off a whole bunch of houses. So you were talking about them getting $100,000. That's another bribe they can give them is, hey, we'll pay off your house.
Yeah.
And you go somewhere else.
Yeah, that's exactly what they'll do. Somewhere else. We'll buy your house, and then they're going to tear them down and burn them. That's exactly what's going to happen. So we'll see. Mayor Pete Buttigieg is heading to East Palestine, Ohio tomorrow.
Can't wait to see his outfit.
We'll see if anyone wants to take some selfies with him. But tomorrow, remember, he said it's all about action. So then maybe we'll find out what tests are being done on the soil, how much dioxin poisoning is there, and if he's going to be in a hazmat suit, which anyone who studies these chemicals knows is the only way to be safe and effective. So maybe that's why he wasn't going. So we'll see. Wait until that cloud blew out of the way before they went there. We've got more news to get to on this Wednesday. We're going to look at the anti-war rally in Washington, D.C. and how the mainstream media decided to go after that and make some nice attacks on it.
We're also going to talk about how the media wants you to have your feelings hurt because J.K. Rowling has a podcast where she is actually talking about being a resilient person and being a critical thinker. They want nothing to do with this, so they're telling you that she's transphobic. Also, I realized I've been saying her name wrong all along. It's not Rawling, it's Rolling, like bowling.
Rolling.
I've been saying
Rolling.
Yeah.
All right.
So I apologize for that.
We got that and much more coming up here. But first I want to tell you, it's, if you're in your midlife, you're starting to feel like you can't stay in shape, and you want that body that you used to have. Well, that's where Nugenix Total T is coming in. They're offering a complimentary bottle of their testosterone booster. It's called, and you can go to all you need to do is text 213-213 and enter the keyword redacted. So here's the thing. If you're getting older, it's harder to work out, harder to feel like, a little bit like your younger self. Maybe you're getting a little bit of that dad bod, feeling a little less like your old self. You don't have time to work out, but you wanted that energy, the body you once had. Again, just text the word redacted to 231-231 to get a complimentary bottle, and you can try this out. If you want more energy to counter that negative physical effects of aging, Nugenix Total T Testosterone Booster with Testofen will help you turn back the clock, re-energize your workouts, get you better results at the gym, and help you look and feel like the man you really want to be. They contain man-boosting and key ingredients like Testofen. It's been validated in 5 clinical studies shown to boost free testosterone levels in men. And because Nugenix Total T boosts the essential free and total testosterone levels that the aging process robs, you're going to feel stronger, leaner, more energy and drive, and more passion as well. Your partner will notice the difference. While every product professes quality, many other products use generic ingredients that are often far less effective than the clinical grade. Not with Nugenix Total T. You get the same clinical potency levels that are used in the trials. It's the #1 selling testosterone booster at GNC. So right now, get a complimentary bottle of Nugenix Total T when you text 231-231 and you enter the keyword redacted. Text now and get a bottle of Nugenix Thermo, their most powerful fat incinerator ever, with key ingredients to help you get back into shape fast. Absolutely free. Text 231-231, enter the keyword redacted. Again, text 231-231, enter the keyword redacted. Texting enrolls you into recurring automated text messages. Consent not required to purchase. Message and data rates may apply. Well, the dust is finally settling on the first anti-war rally, perhaps one of the largest anti-war rallies in a long time, many, many years in the United States. Of course, the anti-war movement in the United States is virtually non-existent, but it was incredibly encouraging to see thousands of people descending on Washington, D.C. over the weekend for the Rage Against the War Machine rally. Dan Cohen, Redacted correspondent, was there, gave a speech, got to take in the sights and sounds and get the media reaction of all of this. Dan, what was it like to be there? Good to see you. And we're in work shirts, so we're working today. Back to work, everyone. We didn't plan.
Yeah, this was no, we didn't. This was not coordinated matching effort, but just totally organic. But Clayton, it was great. I mean, overall, the rally was very encouraging, very positive. It's remarkable to bring together all kinds of different people from various political backgrounds and stripes from all over the country in order to, I mean, we're facing nuclear war, which means human extinction. So the stakes couldn't be higher. So, it's just great to see people come out. And I mean, I met people from Ohio, California, Florida, Texas. People came from all over the country, met a lot of Redacted fans, which was really encouraging. So thanks everyone who's watching, who, gave their love and appreciation for what we do. We really appreciate getting that feedback in person. So overall, I just thought it was great. And I hope it's the kind of birth or rebirth of an anti-war movement here in the United States. I will say it should have been bigger. There are, groups that have organized anti-war rallies in the past who boycotted it because they basically demand ideological conformity and insist that everyone essentially holds the same opinions in order on a number of issues in order to protest war. So they're kind of acting as gatekeepers, and we could have seen a lot more people. I mean, I think that, when you insist that everyone agrees, for example, on trans issues or on issues like January 6th, that these groups actually got wrong. They overlooked the federal involvement and really believed that this was some fascist coup that we had to ally with the Democratic Party for, or how they got lockdowns and COVID vaccine mandates wrong, and that just destroyed so many people's lives. That's okay in the sense that I would still march with those people against war because the stakes are just too high. You can have disagreements, but they demand ideological conformity, and so it's sad, honestly, that they did not want to participate and have been denouncing this protest.
And you're talking about specifically, you're talking about like a lot of the far left. I mean, it's like, so they think it's okay to do, to have gender reassignment surgery. We don't. But I think we could all come together and say we don't want nuclear war, right? So we could put aside ideological differences to do that. But some of these far left groups have just said, no, we're boycotting an anti-nuclear war rally, which is just so, it's just so disheartening. Like, this is where we've come.
Yeah, exactly. And, I used to go to the demonstrations that they would hold with, about hands off Iran and hands off Venezuela and these kinds of things. And I spoke there, and, I got to say, those demonstrations were a lot smaller. And I'm happy I spoke there. I'm proud I spoke at those rallies when few others were. But the fact is, they could have joined forces with the Libertarians and the People's Party and the total patchwork of groups that showed up at the Rage Against the War Machine rally. But instead, they're going to have a separate rally like a month later. So it shows that there's this kind of infighting that serves the warmongers' interests.
So I know the organizers were hoping, we really got to get the message out about this. We had Nick Brana on the show trying to really raise awareness about this rally, and it seemed like Redacted viewers really were engaged with this, which is so exciting. That just warms my heart, because if there's one stance we have on this show, it's anti-war, and we are a pro-peace show. And that was encouraging to see the thousands of people that came out. And I know Nick was even excited about a lot of the mainstream media coverage was going to descend on the Capitol and actually cover this, which I was, wow. Hey, more, the more news we can get out there, the more awareness, great. But the mainstream media sinks its teeth into this. And I was really stunned to watch some of the different mainstream media coverage of this event, and really, taking it to task. I couldn't believe it. Maybe I shouldn't say that. I guess I do believe it. So what was your assessment of how the mainstream media covered this event?
Well, the viral clip that's gone around is from Rachel Maddow, who basically bloviates on camera, denounces the rally, says it was a bunch of Proud Boys and white supremacists. And the funny thing is, I found out after the rally, there were a couple of actual Nazis, Matthew Heimbach, who was part of the Atomwaffen, who has since declared he's no longer a neo-Nazi. And these guys showed up on the periphery of the rally. They didn't participate. They didn't speak. They didn't have anything to do with it. Basically, no one knew, hardly anyone knew they were even there. And Rachel Maddow and the media and these sort of shady social media accounts seized on their appearance in order to discredit the whole thing, which, were those guys feds? Are they not? Who knows? But it's exactly, when you think about how white supremacist organizations are basically always infiltrated by feds and are directed by feds, which is a lot of what we saw at January 6th, that it makes perfect sense. So whether they're feds or not, they're objectively serving the same agenda. So let's watch Rachel Maddow.
This was a tiny event. It was small. It was a weird assemblage of Americans. There were Proud Boys there. There were some of the white supremacist groups you'd recognize from the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville a few years ago. Also represented prominently the remains of the bizarre Lyndon LaRouche cult. There were a lot of people with Russian flags, also the occasional flag of the former Soviet Union. Also, at least one person who guest hosts for Tucker Carlson on the Fox News channel was there as a featured speaker. There were anti-vaccine conspiracy theorists, a lot of them. There were cryptocurrency promoters. It was a really weird group. It was a small rally and a weird one.
So her whole take is that Biden is leading for democracy in Ukraine, which is laughable on its face. And there are people in the United States who do not want people to die in Ukraine. And she has a problem with this.
Yeah. A weird assemblage. That's what she calls us. Anybody who goes to protest against war. The idea that, it's what happens in this war is not only about Ukraine. We're talking about nuclear war, which, let's get this clear, we're talking about human extinction. If there is a nuclear war, it's not just Ukraine that gets, and Moscow that gets wiped off the map. It's the warmongers here in, the DMV in Arlington, Virginia. It's Boeing's headquarters. I don't know if, these neocons and Maddow want to just rule the post-apocalyptic wasteland, if that's their kind of idea of the future, but the stakes couldn't be higher. So to see this smear campaign is just kind of mind-boggling. And then you have Joy Reid piling on and just saying the rally is pro-Putin.
As the president and vice president affirmed the United States' commitment to Ukraine's freedom and to the NATO alliance, the pro-Putin faction in America held a weekend rally, complete with pro-Russia demagoguing. The Rage Against the War Machine rally went about how you'd expect, Russian flag and all.
So Dan, I guess you're pro-Putin. I guess our whole show is pro-Putin because we're there saying no to war. This is how they spin it.
Yeah, if you look closely, you can actually see the sonic waves coming from Putin across the ocean, controlling everybody's speaker. Yeah. Everyone who spoke, you can see them controlling our minds right now.
This is it's pretty impressive. This is a line directly from Putin. So whatever Putin says, we put it right in, and we just regurgitate that right here on the show. It's unbelievable.
Exactly. It's impressive. But so you have all this kind of moronic bloviating attacking the anti-war rally, trying to diminish it and say it's Nazis. At the same time, MSNBC actually sent out a field correspondent named Marissa Para, who did what I thought was a really fair, professional, and good report. You know, how the media should be reporting if it weren't kind of, controlled by corporations and the military-industrial complex. So watch this clip from MSNBC's Marissa Para.
Today, the Libertarian Party and the People's Party are holding a Rage Against the War Machine rally at the Lincoln Memorial to protest billions in funding for Ukraine. Joining me now is NBC's Marissa Para. Marissa, welcome to you. So what are you seeing at this rally? What's the tenor of it?
Yeah. So I'll start first with what we're hearing, because you can probably hear it as well. They just started the speakers section. The march isn't supposed to start for another couple of hours here. But before that, we were hearing music blasting on the speakers, all of the stereotypical anti-war or anti-government songs you can imagine. Signage that this is where you see a little bit more diversity of thought. There are those who are here because they are anti-war as a whole, because of the cost of human life. Those are the ones that are carrying the anti-war or world peace-like signs. But then there are those who say that we shouldn't be involved in this war. Perhaps some of them, as we've spoken to a number of them in the crowds here, some are pro-Russia. Others are saying we should not be involved as the United States because of the cost, whether it's dollars and cents or just the cost overall. Some of them saying that in general, when it comes to U.S. involvement, it's just at too great of a toll. Take a listen.
I mean, this is the fate of humanity on the line right here. We have to avoid a nuclear war. That's what it comes down to.
We've got too much we need money for here. We have gone through Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, all these wars. We've lost every one of them. We've spent trillions of dollars and thousands of lives. Why don't we take care of America first?
Totalitarianism is an act of subversion.
So this is a nonpartisan presence here. We've seen a number of libertarian or independent signage here. We're expecting to hear from speakers like Ron Paul and Tulsi Gabbard. And as we mentioned, we're approaching the one-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So regardless of their reasons for being here, the people that are here, that is a diverse array of opinions, but they believe that we as the United States should not be involved.
So on one hand, you have Rachel Maddow and Joy Reid bloviating and basically telling people what they should think about this anti-war rally, that they should think it's very bad and all pro-Putin. And on the other side, you have MSNBC sending out a field reporter who did a really fair and good job what basically the media should be doing. And so basically discrediting the whole line that MSNBC wanted to promote. And we even got the this sign saying Biden is the Nord Stream bomber from Seymour Hersh in MSNBC. So while the whole U.S. media, corporate media, ignored the bombshell story from Seymour Hersh about the United States blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, they actually got it in because somebody had a sign and some producer or editor at MSNBC used it as B-roll. So congratulations to the person who got that sign, and thanks for getting it into the mainstream media.
I mean, it's amazing to me. That story has been so ignored, and it takes a sneaky producer or a sneaky reporter to just to slide it into a package kind of surreptitiously to put it in there. It is amazing. And I love that sign. Biden is the Nord Stream bomber, right? I mean, that's exactly what he is. That's exactly what the Biden administration did. So as we'll wrap it up with this, but you were talking to people there. I mean, was there this sense that, wow, this is a growing movement, that we need to make this bigger, we need to do this again, we need more people out here, more awareness about this?
Absolutely. I think everyone who was there saw this as a starting point, not, just come together one time, but this is the rebirth of the anti-war movement. And it's not partisan. It's not, stuck inside certain political lines. It's not sectarian or exclusive, because we all understand what is at stake here. And it's just, the existence of humanity. So I'm encouraged by the Rage Against the War Machine rally.
Yeah, and maybe that's why Biden left town. He got out of town and went to visit his friend Vladimir Zelensky in Ukraine to give him more money. So maybe he was scared about that. Hopefully this will resonate. Hopefully more people will come out to these types of rallies. Hopefully we'll see another one of these real soon, and it will be twice as big next time. Dan Cohen, great to see you. Thanks so much for your coverage of this, and great to have you again here on the show. Welcome back.
Thanks a lot, Clayton. Good to be back.
And as Marcus Penny in our chat says now, there has been zero coverage of the anti-war protest on conservative or liberal news stations. So yeah, I mean, there's no appetite for it in the mainstream media. I mean, liberal or conservative.
You know what's crazy to me is when I was at Occupy Wall Street in Washington covering that, and there was an anchor there that was just dissing Ron Paul on camera. But as soon as the cameras went off when they were walking by, he's like, I actually love Ron Paul. You know, like, so these media people are out there with their narrative, but then behind the scenes, like, how could you not support this?
Right.
Yeah, I think, you're all, because they're all paid off by these people. You know?
I also just don't understand the narrative of like, they're all weirdos, as if like they're not weirdos at all rallies, and that negates the message because like maybe someone's not an East Coast media elite that you would be seen having martinis with, that then they're weirdos. I don't know. That just comes off as so elitist because they're not. Yeah.
The Rachel Maddow, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and that reminds me of another story. Like Bill O'Reilly was at a Ron Paul event, and he was walking around interviewing people, but he was selectively choosing anybody who looked stoned, or like he was trying to get people that were not going to give the positive message of Ron Paul.
Exactly. Of course, that they want this coverage. And to hear like the smugness with which Joy Reid says, it went about as you expected it to go. Like, oh, really? Like what? What? We don't have any modern history of anti-war rallies, so how do we expect it to go? Well, we know how we expect the mainstream media to cover it. That went about as expected. In fact, I spoke to one of the organizers a few days before the mainstream media was coming, and he told me that a bunch of the mainstream media organizations were coming there. And I said, that's great. I wonder what their angle will be. And now we know what their angle will be. So,
well, I expect them to collect a lot of data on those people's phones, like the CIA did around anti-war movements in Vietnam, in and around those wars. So, those of you who showed up, hope you used a VPN. We'll tell you about a good one later on. But, there's nothing here that feels ideologically safe to say if it's not pro-war any longer.
That's what the mainstream media wants. Hey, we've got more news to get to on this Wednesday. We're going to talk about how the media wants you to be weak and wants you to be weak, wants you to be weak-minded.
And have your feelings hurt.
We're also going to talk about the vaccine adverse events, and we have new data out today that we're going to talk about with investigative journalist Sonia Elijah, who's really done a remarkable job diving into this data, and what she's discovered is just incredible. We'll lay that out for you on the show in just a few minutes. But I mean, it's no secret right now that if you're tuned in, then experts are predicting a recession right now. And it's, a lot of people are arguing that it's already upon us, and that if you're already seeing this in the printing of the U.S. dollar, the amount of the U.S. dollar being printed, the debt ceiling battle, and how bad things actually are, and the inflation numbers for January that came out, which are up instead of what Biden said, which was down. Actually, the inflation numbers went up. So the U.S. dollar is not doing well. Last year was terrible for most investors. 2023 could be even worse. That is, unless you have some of your money in gold or precious metals to protect yourself from loss. Gold has been going up. That's great. It's going up in value. But I don't want to buy these precious metals so that they're going to explode in value. That's great if they do. And I think they will. But I think it's more about wealth protection right now. So if you have $100 in US dollars, converting that to actual precious metals, which have sustained wars, calamities, financial ruin for 5,000 years, and they've maintained their value for that long. I mean, that's a lot of thousands of years of track record, right? So if you have some of your money sitting in a U.S. bank account that's losing value every day because of inflation, it's a perfect opportunity to start thinking about converting it into gold or silver. And our friends over at Lear Capital can help you do that. They can actually help you get set up with a self-directed IRA. You can convert one of your old IRAs, your 401k, into a gold and silver IRA. You can call Lear Capital today at their 800 number, and they'll get you set up and started. It's 800-613-3557. Again, it's 1-800-613-3557, or you can go to LearRedacted.com. There are a lot of gold companies to choose from, and Lear Capital has over 25 years of experience, thousands of 5-star reviews, a risk-free guarantee. So if you buy some gold coins, like all of our family buys gold coins, you have 24 hours to make a decision on whether or not you want to, say, no, I don't want to do that. So maybe you buy the gold coins, and the next morning you wake up and you're like, no, I'd rather have my money in pesos or the US dollar. Then Lear Capital says, okay, no problem. We'll cancel your order, no problem. So anyway, call Lear today, 1-800-613-3557, or go to LearRedacted.com. And right now they're giving away $15,000 in free bonus medals with a qualified purchase. To learn more, call 1-800-613-3557 or go to LearRedacted.com.
All right. Well, the media wants you to be stupid and weak and a whiny little baby. I can think of another B word, a whiny brat. If you are those things, you are a perfect audience for them. You will keep clicking and you will keep tuning in for them to tell you that your feelings are hurt and you are a victim and you are unsafe. And they do not want you to be mentally equipped to be resilient or think critically. This I was more convinced of than ever before today as I listened to the first 2 episodes of a new podcast called The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling. And then I looked at the coverage of this podcast and saw just how extremely false it was, how full of lies, and how bent it was towards their narrative that will keep you in this sort of place of dichotomous thinking. I almost couldn't believe it. I was sitting with my kids and I just kept yelling out loud, and they had no context for this because they're not following this sort of witch hunts of J.K. Rowling. They just know Harry Potter. But take a look at this CNN article today. What to know about this new podcast and history of harmful anti-trans comments from J.K. Rowling. They just sort of boil it down. Like, if you listen to this, you are already just hopping into her hot steaming pile of anti-trans rhetoric. And that's all you need to know, even though nothing in the podcast was about transgender in the first 2 episodes. Here's Salon saying, J.K. Rowling dismisses her transphobic legacy, saying, I'll be dead. False. That's not what she says at all. What she says is, I'm willing to say controversial things that lead people to critical thought because I am not worried about my legacy, because whatever people think of me when I'm dead, I'm dead. I'm worried about living my life now and saying things that are important now. But those are just lazy and reductive stories. It's clear to me that neither writer listened to the podcast. They're also just full of lies about trans rights and single-sex spaces. Were you going to say something that I cut you off?
No, I was just thinking how sad it is. What type of person would be the type of person that subscribes to like CNN Entertainment's feed, like to get their perspective on these stories, and to see these types of headlines is just so incredible. And I see this constantly from CNN on these stories, these sort of fake headlines and these articles that aren't reflexive of what actually happened in the podcast, in the movie, in the series, anything.
Or what her actual point is about critical thinking. I think she says some brilliant things. I want to point them out in a minute. But also, I mean, I absolutely at one point would have maybe seen something like this on CNN's homepage and thought, oh yeah, J.K. Rowling, I love Potter. I'm going to see what people say about her. And then, oh, she's transphobic, and I might have like got myself worked up around the rhetoric because I wanted to be on the right side of human rights. Sure. Until I decided to read things that challenge my viewpoint about transgender rights, which I've spoken about at length. For instance, one of the things that they say here in CNN is that detransitioning is extremely rare. That's a lie. In fact, new data from a new documentary called what's it called, David? What's it called? We watched it this weekend.
Affirming
Affirmation generation.
Something.
Yes.
There you go.
They talk about how actually detransitioners have a rate of about 60% of people who try to change their bodies into the opposite biological sex, and it hurts. It's painful to do that. The hormones are changing you. They are causing all kinds of contraindications. These surgeries hurt. When you remove your hysterectomy at 16, that's painful. And people stop not because they're discriminated against, but because these medications have contraindications in long-term health. And CNN says it's rare. They have no data to suggest that. It's not true.
They also stated specifically in that documentary that the numbers are most likely much higher because most people, or a lot of people, are going to be embarrassed to come forward after doing that because it kind of like, negates everything they had been saying to their families and all that other stuff.
Good point. I had forgotten about that. And they don't work with their same doctors because it seems like the doctors that put them on these medications don't have any way to support them coming off of it because there's no real data on how to do that. Like, oh, we were all in on giving you T, what they call testosterone. We don't know how to support you coming off of that. And so they just sort of stop taking it and then see what happens. And they feel totally lost by the medical community who can't help fix it.
It's like, the same people that build the boat aren't the same people that take it apart and decommission the boat.
Right.
Totally different buildings, totally different people.
Yeah. Okay, they have other things about like this threat of violence and suicide and around gender dysphoria that CNN just sort of drags out as tropes, which are absolutely not true. But I don't want to keep making these points again because you can rewind the tape to other episodes. But the first 2 episodes of this podcast with J.K. Rowling is not at all about transgender rights. It's about the dangers of witch burning anything or anyone. Now, when we talk about witch burning, it's a saying, is like you rile yourself up around persecuting somebody for an idea, right? And normally when we say that, they're witch burning that person, we say it now as if the witch no longer deserves to be burned, right? When we use this, like, oh, that's a witch hunt. And when you use that, you're like, that person shouldn't be persecuted in that way.
Right. We look back at the Salem witch trials as a awful, stain on our history, right?
Yeah.
I can't believe that we did that to these people, right?
Yeah. And that was largely around some wealthy daughters of wealthy families who got sick and were dying and they couldn't explain it. And they said, oh, there must be some malfeasance in this area. Let's go. And they started to find people. And it comes, usually there's, I'm going to get to this in a second, but there are certain threads that run through witch hunts that are common. And a lot of times they come off of something that's so tiny, but there's a certain type of population that can spark a match towards a witch hunt. And CNN wants that right now to create this kindling.
Well, kindling turns into a fire, but CNN's ratings are so atrocious.
Right.
Of course, they'll try anything right now. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I got 2 points. One, it's literally like the Monty Python bit on the witch. I mean, that's how people are now. It's like, well, she's got a big nose, so, or
she's
a
a witch.
nose, so she must be a witch.
Burn her.
But the other point is, I believe CNN and these news companies know that people aren't going to actually go out and do any research on their own. Because I see TikTok people saying, she's transphobic and all this other stuff, yet you ask them to quote what she said. Well, I don't listen to what she says. I've never listened to her. They don't get any of the information on their own. So they're able to get that narrative out there knowing that these people aren't going to look into anything.
Okay. So here's the beautiful irony about this is that the host of this podcast is a former Christian fundamentalist who once was also against Potter books. And she draws a parallel between how in the early 90s and the early 2000s, it was Christian fundamentalists who were trying to witch hunt J.K. Rowling. And without having read the books. And now she talks to people who were lawyers, who were like the very first people to take to court whether or not schools should have Harry Potter books in their libraries. And interestingly enough, the people on the right who fought to ban her books are now kind of further along in their human journey and regret doing that. Listen to a lawyer. This is the guy who took her books to court so that the library would not have them available to children and lost. And listen to how he feels about that now.
That in talking to David, I learned that he had completely changed his mind about this case that he'd argued so strongly long ago.
If Christians get all caught up in banning books that we think are dangerous for our kids, then we're legally opening the door to non-Christians banning books for their kids that we think are good for their kids.
Okay, so it is the fundamental right that has learned their lesson and said, oh, that's a little dangerous to cancel things. We tried that. This same lawyer had not read the books when he took this to trial, and he lost. And now he later in the podcast asked the host to thank J.K. Rowling for the joy that those books are. He says they are a little dark, but they are actually fantastic. I love them. Tell her I thank her for them, because he actually then, after he fought this crusade, after he witch hunted her, read the books, and decades later feels differently. I think here the point, the parallel that this host is trying to make is that Christians took issue with this book because of black and white thinking and refused to actually argue the point. And now we have transgender people in their new transgender rights activists who want to burn her books, who want to change the name of Quidditch to quad ball, which is really just Muggle Quidditch, promote bans to Hogwarts Legacy video game, which CNN begrudgingly points out is a bestseller in less than a week. And listen to how she sort of draws this argument. This is J.K. Rowling speaking now, talking about how people who do this, who want to ban something, who are book burners, just, you know, it's like it's a trump card because they can't argue the point. Listen to her.
Many of the people involved in those movements understood themselves to be on the side of righteousness, believed they were doing the right thing, felt themselves justified in what they were doing. I suppose for me, book burners by definition, predictably, to me have placed themselves across a line of rational debate. I'm simply going to destroy the idea that I don't like. I will destroy the idea. I can't destroy it, so I will destroy its representation. I will burn this book. There is no book on this planet that I would burn. No book, including books that I do think are damaging. Mm-hmm. Burning, to me, is the last resort of people who cannot argue.
Okay.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
People who burn books can't argue. Think about that. That's such a great line.
Right. I mean, I literally, we were traveling today and I was just choking up at the idea of this. One, because Harry Potter is very personal to me. It's something I share with my children. And because of this woman who is willing to be burned for what she thinks is protection of safe spaces and says so articulately. Now, here is where she says that this is an indication of closed-mindedness. And I listened to this three times. I won't make you do 3 times because I think it's so poignant. Listen.
There's a huge appeal, and I tried to show this in the Potter books, to black and white thinking. It's the easiest place to be, and in many ways is the safest place to be. If you take an all-or-nothing position on anything, you will definitely find comrades. You will easily find a community. I've sworn allegiance to this one simple idea. What I tried to show in the Potter books, and what I feel very strongly myself, we should mistrust ourselves most when we are certain. And we should question ourselves most when we receive a rush of adrenaline by doing or saying something. Many people mistake that rush of adrenaline for the voice of conscience. I've got a rush from saying that, I'm right. Mm-hmm. In my worldview, conscience speaks in a very small and inconvenient voice, and it's normally saying to you, think again, look more deeply, consider this.
Okay.
And someone points out that Hitler burned books. Yeah, if you You're in the same camp as Hitler. You want to burn books. Also, Berserk says in our chat, when the debate is lost, slander becomes the tool of the loser. I love that.
Okay, I'm gonna have to think about that.
It's good. It's good.
All right.
It means if you can't argue with someone, if you don't have the intelligence to argue, then you burn things.
Or not even necessarily argue, but discuss viewpoints.
Right.
And I think what she's saying here is that if you've gotten yourself so worked up about something that you are now part of what this great book that I just read last week, The Coddling of the American Mind, Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt, they call this the call-out culture. When someone is calling out offenses for social status. Now think about that. Like you're in a crowded place and you post a video for calling out somebody for being a racist, and that increases your social score. In a classroom, when you say, oh, that's patriarchal or you're cisgendered or whatever, then you get social status boosted because it signals to the world, I am not a racist, I am woke, I can call that out, I get a rush of adrenaline, that makes me right. If you take up a grievance privately with somebody, you get no social points and you'd be seen as fraternizing with the enemy. And so instead, you're calling it out because you're so right. And so what she's saying here is that, if you are part of that call out culture, you have closed yourself off to some type of thinking, to critical thinking. And you're saying, this is my conscience trying to make the world better, but while lifting myself up through the call out culture. And I think what she's saying is we need to sort of think more slowly, think more rationally, and be able to have conversations with other people critically. What the podcast is about is that J.K. Rowling is a domestic and sexual abuse survivor. She has also suffered depression, and she wrote most of this fantastic series while she was in the darkest times of her life. So this is a story about succeeding while you're getting tarred and feathered, about resilience, about actually being someone who knows something about being a female survivor of domestic abuse and male violence. But the media doesn't want you to hear this story. They want you to reduce her to a transphobe, to someone who's hateful.
Well, that's it. Like, if you know her story, like this should be the woman that all of these people put on a pedestal. Talk about creating a world of diversity and not judging anybody for what or who they are, other than Voldemort. But she has created a diverse world, and she's very open-minded. She said that Dumbledore was gay like years and years and years ago. Like, she's very open and honest with that stuff. And I just this is like an ally to everyone, not an enemy. And I just can't see why they do this with no proof or evidence whatsoever.
Right.
Well, we are given an opportunity to offer empathy for Voldemort. Even Voldemort gets a backstory.
That's true.
And
that's true.
Like, we get to see how his choices led him one way or another, and we're invited in to feel sorry for him. So we can,
the choices that lead him to a dark path.
Yes.
Right. Lead him to evil. Right.
Now, in the coddling book, though, the authors point out that witch hunts are usually sparked from some minor slight, which is true in this case. Like, she liked a tweet that people thought was hateful, and then she spoke out for another woman for saying that single-sex spaces were important. But there's another thing that this has in common, all witch hunts, is that people are afraid to speak up for the witch, because they know this is irrational, but they're afraid to get caught up in the mob and get burned themselves. So they let other people burn. And so I see these CNN pieces, salon pieces, as witch hunters, even though I think there must be more critical minds behind these stories. So she is just not willing to let things like this happen. Like, here's a Redux story from Canada. This weekend, mother threatened with arrest after confronting male watching girls undress in changing rooms at this swimming pool. The woman there was a chat group, a mother's chat group saying there's a person, a male, that's been in this pool for several weeks now. Watch out for him. She saw him, and she watched him go in, just take his shoes on and off, and then walk into the bathroom stall next to her daughter and peek underneath. And she said, I think you should get out of here. And he said, I don't have to, because I'm a female identifier and this is my right. And now the pool is saying, well, you could get arrested for saying that he can't be in there while he's literally peeking under. So this is J.K. Rowling's point, is that there is a need for single-sex spaces. We can have third spaces for people with gender dysphoria without actually impinging on women's rights. Here's another This Week in Transgender News, a tweet from Abigail Schreier, author of Irreparable Damage. Why was this woman face being allowed to dominate headlines?
Well, let's read the headline for people that are driving and can't hear it.
Okay.
So it says, New York Post headline says, Arkansas woman arrested for making bomb threat against Mississippi college town.
And she says, one day newsrooms will wake up and be astonished that they ever published headlines like this. Like,
I have to think the New York Post is doing this tongue in cheek. Like New York Post headlines are classic, right?
Yeah.
They're just playing this one straight. No pun intended. They're literally, and if you see the photo, if you're driving, you can't watch us. You're listening to the audio version of the show. It's a dude with a beard. Like, it's a dude, right? And the headline reads, Arkansas woman arrested for, because this guy identifies as a woman.
I guess, again, I refer you to the piece we did on woman face, and I ask you, how am I as a woman supposed to feel about that? Now the courts in Canada will start to hear cases such as this woman who is suing her doctors for giving her medically unnecessary breast removal surgery and hysterectomy as a teenager. Watch.
Each step involved irreversible alterations to my body and came with serious risks. Yet all were met with little challenge despite my long-standing history of mental health struggles and no indication of gender-related distress in childhood or adolescence. I am alleging that this lack of inquiry is a failure of due diligence amounting to medical negligence towards a vulnerable patient.
Okay. To my mind, she should not have to sue. There should have been adults to protect her from this in the first place. Hysterectomies with no medically necessary. I mean, there's all kinds of things that happen to a body when you remove the uterus. Okay. Incidentally, though, we're bringing this back full circle. The lawyer who fought to ban Potter books lost his case because the courts decided that even a minor child has a right to freedom of information. So the courts in this case protected children's access to literature. So will the courts again side with Rowling and protect children from medical experimentation? Or will they side with women and protect them for single-sex spaces? Even if they do, the media will still tell you that she's a transphobe, so you keep clicking.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. There's so many different viewpoints on this, but most people are saying like it's absolutely based what J.K. Rowling had said, and we should all listen to that podcast.
Yeah, I do recommend the podcast. I am a little jealous about the access. I would have loved to have hosted a podcast because she so rarely speaks, and
never too late.
Yeah, maybe I'll do the sequel. And I'm also just struck that she is so able to make her point so clearly and also lets us into a little bit of her life that we don't normally get. It's really well done. And I think that it is an important story of actually standing your ground that they just don't want you to hear. They don't want you to hear stories of emotional resilience because that makes you a better consumer of news. We do. And so that's why we're bringing this to you.
Yeah, and we don't
I don't know if you know, but there's actually a movie, an old movie about J.K. Rowling, and that's where I learned about her having to pen her name as J.K. so they didn't know it was a woman. Like, it's a really good little movie. And then there's an interview that she did with Daniel Radcliffe where she kind of goes over a lot of these points again and talks about Dumbledore and the decisions she made and the diversity in the show. And that's a really good. It's probably like an hour and a half long, but it's really good. I mean, I was like emotional the whole time. It was just really good. Like, she's just such a good person.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think she sort of cautions about like good and bad people, like using those kind of black and white terms. Everybody, all humans are complicated. Even our like Hierophant is, in Dumbledore is flawed.
Yeah.
And so, I think I sort of leave room for her to be a flawed human being, but also like stand her ground on behalf of the rest of us, so that if she's like, so that we don't all have to be witch hunted.
Well, we've got more news to get to on this Wednesday. We're going to be moving to Rumble for our next story, which is on vaccine adverse effects, because we're going to go into some data that Pfizer and Moderna probably won't like us to talk about, but the numbers are unbelievable, and investigative journalist Sonia Elijah is going to be joining us for that. But first, before we go there,
we're going to tell you about our friends over at MedCline. Now, this is a very revolutionary way to learn to sleep differently and better. I had noticed that I like to sleep on my side, but I was starting to get really numb shoulders from doing that. And I never was able to get rid of my maternity pillow, which goes between my knees. MedCline is a medical solution that actually solves all of those things at once. So what it does is elevate your shoulder so you can get your arm underneath it. So you're not putting the body weight of your whole body onto your shoulder and then having that fall asleep or pinch a nerve or what have you. There are actually dozens of ways that you can position yourself in what essentially is a wedge and a maternity pillow all wrapped up in one, and it's wonderful. It helps with acid reflux, it helps with shoulder pain, it also helps with just sort of people who may have sleep apnea, where you need to sleep on one side or the other. It will help you position yourself into the exact right position for you. In fact, 95% of patients reported an overall improvement in sleep quality when using MedCline. MedCline has been validated in 7 independent clinical trials as the most effective natural treatment for heartburn, regurgitation, and the many painful symptoms of GERD, all while you sleep. 93% of patients reported a reduction in nighttime heartburn with the reflux relief system and overall improvement of sleep quality. The MedCline shoulder relief system also, again, helps people suffering from shoulder pain or rotator cuff injuries, arthritis. It's just it's really just such a great solution. I invite you to go to the website and check it out. So, and also if you buy a product right now, you get 20% off when you go to medcline.com/redacted. That's MEDCLINE. medcline.com/redacted. Get 20% off and a better night's sleep today. medcline.com/redacted.
All right, I love it. And we were just traveling for a few days, and it's never good when you're traveling on the beds, and so I cannot wait to get into a proper night's sleep back into my sleep chamber tonight. I'm super excited about that. All right, so we're going to move over to Rumble now. Because we have to, because there's some stuff that we're going to be covering that we don't think would be accepted by YouTube. We've been banned. Specifically, we've been blocked and banned on YouTube for covering a portion of this next story. So we are going to move over there and do this next story. So come on over to Rumble where it's nice and warm. It's rumble.com/redacted is our Rumble channel. So come on over and make sure you're subscribed over there as well. And that way we have 2 places that in case anything ever happens here, we're always there, and we're always publishing simultaneously. So rumble.com/redacted. Come on over. Thanks everyone on YouTube, and hello to all of you exclusively now on Rumble. Good to see all of you.